Welcome back, everyone, and if you're new here, I'm so glad you found the channel. We're on an exciting journey to reach 10k subscribers by next year, and every like, comment and subscription brings us one step closer. Your support means everything. Now, let's jump into today's video. The autumn wind whispered through the streets of Larkspur, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. Something unfamiliar. Ellie Thomas stood on her back porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the clouds gather over the mountain peaks that surrounded the small town. The mountains had always been there, silent guardians keeping the outside world at bay, but lately they felt more like prison walls. Larkspur wasn't the kind of place that appeared on maps. With just over 2,000 residents, it was little more than a collection of buildings nestled in the shadow of towering peaks. The nearest city was 4 hours away, by car, and that was only when the weather permitted travel along the winding mountain roads. Most of the year, the town's residents lived in comfortable isolation, proud of their self-sufficiency and tight-knit community. But everything changed the night the lights appeared. Ellie first noticed them during one of her regular stargazing sessions. As the high school's science teacher, she had convinced the board to fund a decent telescope for the astronomy club. That Friday evening, she'd been adjusting the lens when something caught her eye, a flash of blue-green light that definitely wasn't a star. At first, she assumed it was the aurora borealis, though they were too far south for that. The lights danced across the sky in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Jonah Carter had been working late at his auto shop when all the equipment suddenly powered down. The radio, which had been playing classic rock, went silent before erupting in a burst of static that made his teeth vibrate. When he stepped outside to check the power lines, he saw them too, lights that moved in ways that defied explanation. The next morning, Tess Rivera was already investigating. Fresh out of journalism school, and eager to prove herself at the Larkspur Gazette, she'd started collecting witness statements before sunrise. The lights had been visible all across town, and everyone had a theory. Some blamed military exercises from the old research facility up in the mountains. Others pointed to weather balloons or experimental aircraft. A few of the older residents muttered about how they'd seen similar things before, decades ago, but those stories had been dismissed as tall tales. Dr. Regina Hayes noticed something else entirely. In her small medical examiner's office at the edge of town, she was reviewing the blood work from routine checkups when she noticed an anomaly. Several patients had shown elevated levels of an unidentifiable compound in their blood. She ran the tests again, thinking it was an equipment malfunction, but the results were the same. Whatever this substance was, it wasn't in any of her medical databases. Sheriff Danny McAllister had his hands full trying to maintain order. The phone at the station hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Reports of electrical malfunctions, strange noises, and animals acting peculiar. The deer that usually kept to the forests were wandering into town, acting erratic and aggressive. His deputy found 3 dead crows on Main Street, their bodies twisted in unnatural positions. But it was Charlie Lynch, the old hermit who lived on the outskirts of town, who tried to warn them all. He'd been ranting about visitors from the sky for decades, ever since his time as a security guard at the research facility before it shut down. Most people wrote him off as a conspiracy theorist, but there was something different about him now. The wild look in his eyes had been replaced by a cold certainty. They're back, he told anyone who would listen, and this time they're not just watching. The first confirmation that something was truly wrong came a week after the lights appeared. Caleb Miller, who owned the largest farm on the outskirts of town, didn't show up for his regular morning coffee at Rose's Diner. When Sheriff McAllister went to check on him, he found the farmer's house empty. The TV was still on, coffee half drunk on the kitchen table. There were no signs of struggle. No evidence of foul play. Just emptiness. They found Caleb's body 3 days later in his north field. Dr. Hayes had seen her share of death over the years, but nothing like this. The body lay in a perfect circle of scorched earth, unmarked, except for a series of precise geometric patterns burned into the skin. They weren't random. Each mark was identical, spaced with impossible precision. The burns weren't consistent with any known cause, and the internal damage, that was something else entirely. "I've never seen anything like this," Regina told Sheriff McAllister in the privacy of her office. "The organs show signs of manipulation, but not with any tools I'm familiar with. And there's something else." She pulled up the toxicology report. "That compound I found in the blood work of other patients. It's present here too, but in massive concentrations." The sheriff did his best to keep the details quiet, but in a town like Larkspur, secrets didn't stay buried long. Rumours spread faster than the autumn fires that occasionally threatened the forests. People began to whisper about lights in their windows at night, lost time, and strange dreams they couldn't quite remember upon waking. Ellie spent her evenings on the roof of the high school, documenting everything she saw through the telescope. The lights kept appearing, but now they seemed to be moving in specific patterns, concentrating around certain areas of town. She started mapping the appearances, looking for a pattern that might make sense of it all. Jonah noticed something too. As a mechanic, he was sensitive to the rhythms of machines, and something was off. Cars brought into his shop had inexplicable electrical problems. Brand new batteries would drain overnight. GPS systems would show impossible coordinates. And every time these malfunctions occurred, they coincided with the appearance of the lights. Tess dug deeper into the town's history, spending long hours in the newspaper's archives. She discovered that similar incidents had occurred before, in 1962, 1989, and 1997. Each time there were reports of lights, electrical disturbances, and people acting strangely. And each time, shortly after the incidents began, people disappeared. The old government facility loomed over Larkspur like a forgotten sentinel. Its concrete walls had weathered decades of mountain storms, the windows dark and empty. Local teenagers sometimes dared each other to break in, but none ever made it past the rusted gates. Something about the place felt wrong, as if the very air around it was charged with an ancient warning. Jonah knew more about the facility than he let on. During his military service, he'd come across classified documents that mentioned Larkspur. The facility had officially been a weather research station, but the documents hinted at something else. A project called Silent Echo that ran from 1960 to 1997. The details were sparse, but one phrase kept appearing: non-terrestrial biological anomalies. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ellie noticed something peculiar through her telescope. The lights weren't just appearing randomly anymore. They were converging on the facility. She called Tess, who arrived with her camera equipment within minutes. Together, they watched as the phenomena intensified. The lights pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost biological, like the beating of an alien heart. "Look at this," Ellie said, pointing to her laptop screen. She'd been tracking the light patterns for weeks. "They're not just moving randomly, they're searching for something." Tess zoomed in with her camera, capturing footage of the display. The old-timers in town keep talking about similar lights back in the 60s. Charlie Lynch isn't the only one who remembers them. The mention of Charlie prompted them to pay him a visit. They found the old man in his cluttered cabin, walls covered with hand-drawn maps and notes. His hands shook as he showed them his records, decades of observations, meticulously documented. "They've been here all along," Charlie explained, his voice trembling. "The facility, it wasn't built to study weather. It was built to study them. But something went wrong in 97. That's when they shut it down. That's when the real experiments began." The next disappearance shattered any remaining doubt. Lisa Cooper, a local nurse, vanished while walking home from her night shift. The only evidence was her cell phone, found in the middle of the street. When Dr. Hayes examined it, the device's internal components had been completely rearranged, as if something had reached inside and reorganized its very structure. Sheriff McAllister couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. 4 people had vanished in 2 weeks, each disappearance marked by the same signs: electrical disturbances, the strange lights, and an eerie silence that fell over the town like a shroud. He called a town meeting at the high school gymnasium. The room was packed, fear hanging thick in the air. As McAllister tried to maintain calm, Dr. Hayes shared her findings. The strange compound in the bloodwork was spreading. More than half the town's residents now showed traces of it. Those with higher concentrations reported strange dreams, visions of vast, dark spaces and beings that defied description. Ellie stood up, her hands steady as she presented her data. The lights followed a pattern that corresponded with the lunar cycle, intensifying during the new moon. The next new moon was just 3 days away. That's when Jonah revealed what he knew about the facility. The project hadn't just studied the phenomena, it had attempted communication. The beings, whatever they were, had made contact decades ago. The government had struck some kind of deal, but the details died with the project's shutdown. As the meeting ended, the power went out across town. In the darkness, everyone saw it, lights descending from the mountains, more than ever before. They moved with purpose now, sweeping through the streets like searchlights from hell. Dogs began howling, a chorus of terror that echoed through the valley. Tess convinced Jonah and Ellie to accompany her to the facility that night. Armed with cameras and Jonah's military experience, they scaled the perimeter fence. The old security systems were dead, but something else was very much alive. The concrete thrummed with energy, and the air tasted like metal. Inside, emergency lights flickered to life, though the power had been cut decades ago. Their flashlight beams revealed corridors untouched by time, as if the facility had been waiting for this moment. In the main laboratory, they found evidence of the truth. Photographs of craft that defied physics, specimens preserved in strange liquids, and documents detailing a decades-long exchange. They weren't just studying them, Jonah whispered, examining the files. They were trading with them, human subjects in exchange for technology. A noise echoed through the facility, metal grinding against metal. Deep beneath their feet, something was awakening. Ancient machinery, dormant for years, hummed to life. The walls began to pulse with a blue-green light that matched the phenomena in the sky. In the lowest level, they found the communication chamber. The technology was unlike anything they'd ever seen, a hybrid of human and alien design. As they examined it, the equipment activated on its own. Screens flickered with impossible images, star maps, biological diagrams, and messages in a language that hurt to look at. That's when they heard the screams, distant at first, then growing closer. Through the facility's windows, they watched in horror as lights descended on the town. But these weren't like the others. These were solid, real, and they carried with them a terrible purpose. The night had only begun. Dr. Regina Hayes was examining another body when the lights went out in her laboratory. This victim was different. Robert Palmer, found in his bed, every drop of blood extracted from his body, without a single puncture wound. As darkness fell, her computer screen flickered to life on its own, displaying impossible readings. The compound she'd discovered in the townspeople's blood was changing, evolving into something that resembled no known substance on Earth. Above ground, chaos erupted. The beings had finally revealed themselves, though anyone who saw them clearly found their minds struggling to process the sight. They moved like liquid shadow, their forms shifting between states of matter. Some witnesses described them as tall, elongated figures that bent in ways that violated natural law. Others saw nothing at all, just empty spaces in the air that somehow had mass and intention. Sheriff McAllister organised an evacuation, but the mountain roads had become impassable. Dense fog rolled down from the peaks, carrying within it pulses of light that paralysed anyone caught in their glare. Those who were touched by the lights began to change. Their eyes took on a luminescent quality, and they spoke of visions, vast cities beneath alien suns, and creatures that had watched humanity since the first campfire cast shadows on cave walls. In the facility, Ellie, Jonah, and Tess made a horrifying discovery. The communication chamber contained records of the original agreement. The government hadn't just traded with the beings, they'd invited them, offering up the town of Larkspur as a permanent research site. The townspeople had been subjects in a long-term experiment, their bloodlines carefully monitored over generations. "Look at these dates," Tess said, her voice shaking as she examined the files. "The lights in 62, 89, 97, they weren't observations, they were harvests." Jonah found the facility's armory, but the weapons inside weren't standard military issue. They were hybrid devices, reverse-engineered from alien technology. They knew, he realized, they knew this day was coming, and they left as a way to fight back. The beings had a singular purpose: human consciousness itself. They weren't interested in resources or territory. They were collectors of awareness, harvesters of the unique way human minds perceived reality. Each abduction had been an attempt to understand and extract this essence, but their previous methods had been crude, often fatal to their subjects. Now they had perfected the process. Charlie Lynch appeared at the facility, his eyes wild with recognition. "I remember everything now," he gasped. "I was part of the security team in 97 when they took half the town. We didn't stop them, we helped them. But something went wrong. The beings, they found something in our minds they didn't expect. Something that frightened them." The old man's memories had been suppressed, locked away by the same technology that now filled the facility with its ominous hum. As the truth emerged, more townspeople began to remember. Strange dreams that weren't dreams, missing time that spanned years, and knowledge of things they couldn't possibly know. Dr. Hayes made her way to the facility, bringing with her the results of her latest tests. The compound in the blood wasn't just changing people, it was preparing them. Each generation in Larkspur had been subtly altered, their genetic code rewritten to be more compatible with the being's consciousness extraction process. Outside, the lights descended fully into the town. They moved with purpose now, each one targeting specific houses, specific people. Those who had the highest concentrations of the compound in their blood were taken first. The beings didn't need to break down doors or smash windows, they simply passed through solid matter, leaving behind only a shimmer in the air and the lingering scent of ozone. In the facility's lower levels, the hybrid technology began to activate fully. Screens filled with images of other towns, other facilities, other harvests happening simultaneously across the globe. Larkspur wasn't unique, it was just one of many sites, each carefully prepared over decades for this moment. The group watched in horror as the truth revealed itself through the facility's archives. The beings had been guiding human development for centuries, placing subtle markers in our evolution. The Industrial Revolution, the digital age, even the development of space travel, all had been nudged forward by their invisible hand, preparing humanity for this harvest. But they had made one crucial mistake. In studying human consciousness, they had failed to understand human will. As the aliens moved through Larkspur, they encountered something they hadn't expected: resistance. Not with weapons or technology, but with the sheer, stubborn refusal to submit that marked humanity at its core. The townspeople who remained untaken began to gather at the high school, drawn there by an instinct they didn't understand. The alien compound in their blood had created a connection, not just to the beings, but to each other. They could feel each other's presence, share each other's thoughts. What the aliens had intended as a means of control had become a weapon against them. In the facility's communication chamber, Ellie made a discovery that changed everything. The hybrid technology wasn't just for communication. It was a key to understanding the being's true nature, and in that understanding lay the possibility of fighting back. As midnight approached, the air itself seemed to vibrate with potential. The harvest had begun, but so had the resistance. Humanity had been preparing for this moment too, not through conscious knowledge, but through the very thing the aliens sought to harvest, our unique way of perceiving and changing reality. The real battle for Larkspur was about to begin. The high school gymnasium had become a fortress of last resort. Hundreds of townspeople huddled inside, their eyes glowing with the same eerie luminescence that pulsed through the facility's machinery. Dr. Hayes moved among them, documenting the changes. The alien compound had reached critical levels in their blood, but instead of succumbing to it, they were adapting. Their consciousness is linking, she explained to Sheriff McAllister, showing him brainwave readings from her portable equipment. Every person in this room is becoming part of a larger awareness. Outside, the beings continued their harvest, but they were meeting unexpected resistance. Those they tried to take fought back with newfound abilities. The aliens' own modifications had given humans access to capabilities they never intended to share. Some people could now perceive the beings' true forms, while others developed a kind of psychic shield that repelled the harvester's touch. In the facility's communication chamber, Ellie made the breakthrough they desperately needed. The hybrid technology wasn't just for talking to the aliens, it was a window into their dimension. Through it, she could see their world, a vast, dark expanse filled with collected consciousnesses, each one preserved like a butterfly pinned to velvet. They're not just collectors, she realized, her voice trembling. They're archivists. They preserve dying species by extracting and storing their awareness, and they think humanity is on the brink of extinction. Jonah worked to understand the hybrid weapons, discovering that they operated on principles of consciousness rather than physical force. These don't shoot bullets, he explained. They project human thought patterns, the one thing they can't defend against. Tess, who had been documenting everything, found patterns in the facility's historical records that pointed to a larger truth. The beings hadn't chosen Larkspur randomly. The town sat at the intersection of natural energy lines that amplified psychic phenomena. The indigenous people who lived here centuries ago had known this, leaving behind cave paintings that depicted eerily familiar lights in the sky. Charlie Lynch's memories continued to surface. He remembered the failed harvest of '97, when the beings discovered something that forced them to retreat. They found faith, he said, his voice stronger now. Not religious faith, but something deeper. The human ability to believe in possibility, even in the face of impossible odds. It frightened them because it was something they couldn't quantify or collect. The night deepened, and the beings grew more desperate. They had never encountered such resistance. In previous harvests, humans had been passive, their consciousness easily extracted and stored. But the people of Larkspur were fighting back with the aliens' own tools. The genetic modifications meant to make them compliant had instead made them powerful. From her makeshift lab in the gymnasium, Dr. Hayes monitored the changes in the townspeople. The alien compound was creating new neural pathways, allowing humans to access parts of their brains that had been dormant. People reported seeing through walls, feeling others' emotions, and even glimpsing moments in time that hadn't happened yet. This is what they were really afraid of, she told Ellie over a secure phone line. Not that we would fight them with weapons, but that we would evolve beyond their ability to contain us. In the facility, Ellie and Jonah made a terrifying discovery. The beings weren't just collecting consciousness, they were farming it. Each harvest provided them with raw material for their own evolution. Human awareness was unique in the universe, capable of imagining new realities and willing them into existence. The beings fed on this ability, using it to maintain their own existence. The truth struck Ellie like a physical blow. The beings weren't aliens in the traditional sense. They were what humanity might become if it evolved along a different path. Creatures of pure consciousness who had lost their ability to generate new thoughts and possibilities. They needed human minds to survive. As this revelation spread through the town's newly connected consciousness, something unprecedented began to happen. The townspeople started to use their collective awareness to reshape reality itself. The very thing the beings had sought to harvest was being turned against them. Walls between dimensions began to thin. The lights in the sky took on new forms, responding to human thought rather than alien control. The beings found themselves caught in a trap of their own making. They had created the perfect conditions for human consciousness to transcend its normal limitations. In the streets of Larkspur, the final battle wasn't fought with weapons or technology, but with pure will. The townspeople, led by Ellie's understanding and strengthened by their collective consciousness, began to push back against the harvest. Each person became a beacon of resistance, their minds linked in a network of shared purpose that the beings couldn't penetrate. The aliens had never considered this possibility. In all their centuries of collecting consciousness across the universe, they had never encountered a species that could unite its awareness so completely. The very modifications they had introduced to make humans easier to harvest had given them the tools for transcendence. But victory would come at a price. As the connected consciousness of Larkspur grew stronger, the boundaries between individual minds began to blur. They were becoming something new, neither fully human nor alien, but a third thing altogether. The question was no longer whether they could survive the harvest, but whether they would remain themselves after it ended. The harvest reached its crescendo at midnight. The beings, realizing their control was slipping, launched a final, desperate attempt to complete their mission. The sky above Larkspur erupted with light, not just the usual blue-green pulses, but waves of colour that defied description. The air itself seemed to tear open, revealing glimpses of the dimension where the beings stored their collected consciousnesses. Through their shared awareness, the townspeople could see the truth of what lay beyond those tiers in reality. Vast archives stretched into infinity, filled with the preserved minds of countless species. Some were ancient beyond imagination, collected from worlds that had died before Earth's sun first ignited. Others were more recent, and with horror, the people of Larkspur recognized some of them as human. The lost ones from previous harvests. Dr. Hayes, monitoring the collective consciousness from her equipment in the gymnasium, detected a new pattern emerging. The stored minds, she announced, her voice carrying through the linked awareness of the town. They're not dormant, they're aware, and they're trying to communicate. In the facility's communication chamber, Ellie received the message first. The archived consciousnesses weren't just preserved, they were imprisoned, kept in a state of eternal awareness without the ability to grow or change. The beings had created a library of living minds, each one forever experiencing the moment of its capture. Through the hybrid technology, voices from 1,000 worlds spoke at once. They shared the beings' true weakness. Their inability to generate new thoughts had made them parasites, dependent on harvesting the consciousness of other species to maintain their own existence. But in doing so, they had created the seeds of their own downfall. Jonah, who had mastered the hybrid weapons, discovered they could be tuned to the frequency of the collective human consciousness. We're not just fighting them, he realized. We're rewriting the rules of reality itself. The captured minds from past harvests began to stir, awakened by the unprecedented union of human consciousness. Through the tears in space-time, they reached out. The beings had never faced a coordinated rebellion from both their current victims and their stored collections. Tess, documenting everything through the shared awareness, witnessed the moment the tide turned. The townspeople, their minds fully linked, began to project their collective will, not just defensively, but offensively. They weren't just resisting the harvest, they were reaching into the being's dimension, disrupting the very foundations of their existence. Charlie Lynch, his decades of suppressed memories now fully restored, guided them in focusing their shared consciousness. They feed on our ability to imagine, he explained through the collective link. So let's show them just how powerful human imagination can be. The people of Larkspur began to create, not with tools or technology, but with pure thought given form through their evolved consciousness. They imagined barriers that became real, shields of pure will that the beings couldn't penetrate. They projected their understanding of joy, love, grief, and every other human emotion that the beings had lost in their evolution toward pure consciousness. The effect was devastating. The beings, confronted with the raw power of human emotional experience, began to falter. Their forms became unstable, flickering between states of existence as they struggled to maintain their cohesion. The very thing they had sought to harvest was proving too powerful to contain. In the facility, the hybrid technology started to overload. Screens exploded in cascades of sparks as the boundary between dimensions buckled under the strain of so much conscious energy. The being's archive began to unravel, releasing thousands of stored minds back into the universe. Dr. Hayes tracked the changes in the townspeople's brainwave patterns as the collective consciousness reached its peak. "We're approaching a point of no return," she warned. "Our minds are becoming something entirely new. If we continue, we may not be able to return to our former selves." But there was no going back. The beings, in their desperation, tried one last gambit. They attempted to merge with the human collective consciousness, seeking to absorb rather than collect. It was a fatal mistake. The combined will of Larkspur's population, strengthened by generations of subtle genetic manipulation, and now fully awakened, proved too powerful to consume. Instead of being absorbed, the human consciousness began to absorb the beings themselves. Thousands of years of collected knowledge and experience flooded into the shared awareness of the town. The beings' entire history, their evolution, their fall from grace, their desperate hunt for consciousness across the universe, became part of humanity's story. The sky above Larkspur erupted in a final display of impossible light as reality itself reshaped around the town. When it was over, the beings were gone, not destroyed, but transformed. They had become part of the very thing they had sought to harvest. Their consciousness merged with humanity's in a way they never intended. The tears in reality sealed themselves, but the changes they brought remained. The people of Larkspur would never be the same. Their shared consciousness persisted, though muted, a constant awareness of each other's presence at the edges of their minds. They had become a new kind of human, carrying within them not just their own experiences, but echoes of consciousness from across the universe. In the days that followed, government vehicles arrived to find a town transformed. They expected to find chaos and destruction. Instead, they found a community united in a way that defied explanation. The official story would describe a mass hallucination, a chemical leak, or a weather phenomenon, anything but the truth. But the truth lived on in the connected minds of Larkspur's citizens. They knew what had happened, what they had become, and they knew that somewhere out in the vast darkness between stars, other beings were watching, learning, and perhaps fearing what humanity might become. Ellie returned to her telescope, but now she saw the sky with new eyes. The lights still appeared sometimes, but they were different now. Not alien observers, but reminders of what lurked behind the veil of reality. The town had survived its harvest, but more than that, it had evolved. The question was no longer whether aliens existed, but what humanity would become now that they had merged with something from beyond the stars. The truth wasn't just that aliens existed, it was that we had become them and they had become us in a transformation that neither side had expected. And somewhere in the darkness between dimensions, the collected consciousness of 1,000 worlds stirred, awakening to new possibilities. The harvest had ended, but the real changes were just beginning. 1 year later, the autumn wind still whispered through Larkspur, but it carried different secrets now. The town looked the same on the surface, the same mountain backdrop, the same quiet streets, the same small-town rhythm of life. But everything had changed in ways that only its residents could understand. Ellie's classroom at the high school had become something more than just a place of learning. Her students, many of whom had been present during the harvest, shared a connection that went beyond normal teenage bonds. When she taught astronomy now, she didn't need a telescope to show them the stars. They could see them together, their shared consciousness, reaching out into the cosmos with a perspective that merged human curiosity with alien knowledge. Dr. Hayes had converted her medical practice into a research centre, monitoring the ongoing changes in the town's population. The alien compound in their blood had stabilised, becoming a permanent part of their genetic makeup. Children born after the harvest showed signs of the enhanced consciousness from birth, their minds naturally linking to the town's collective awareness. "They're not just human anymore," she wrote in her private journals, "but they're not aliens either. They're the next step in our evolution happening right here in this small mountain town." Jonah kept the hybrid weapons secured in a vault beneath his auto shop, though they rarely functioned anymore. The technology seemed to be adapting, changing along with the townspeople. Sometimes late at night, the devices would activate on their own, displaying images of distant worlds and civilizations that had faced their own harvests. The old government facility had been officially sealed, but its influence continued to spread. The hybrid technology had merged with the town's infrastructure in subtle ways. Streetlights responded to collective emotions. Computers operated on thought as much as electricity, and the very walls of buildings seemed to resonate with the town's shared consciousness. Tess's articles for the Larkspur Gazette never mentioned aliens or harvests. Instead, she wrote about community, about connection, about the strange and wonderful ways people could change when faced with the impossible. Her words carried double meanings that only Larkspur residents could truly understand. Charlie Lynch had found a kind of peace. His decades of paranoid warnings had been vindicated, but more than that, he had found his place in the collective consciousness. His memories of the earlier harvests helped the town understand their new reality, and his cabin became a gathering place for those seeking to explore their expanded awareness. The government teams had eventually left, their reports filled with reasonable explanations for unreasonable events, but they left behind monitoring devices, hidden in the mountains and forests around town. Sometimes these devices would inexplicably stop working, their electronic eyes blinded by what they tried to observe. Sheriff McAllister maintained the peace, though the nature of crime had changed in Larkspur. With everyone connected to the collective consciousness, secrets became nearly impossible to keep. The few outsiders who moved to town either adapted, their minds gradually joining the collective awareness, or they left, driven away by a sense of exclusion they couldn't quite explain. But it was the children who showed the most dramatic changes. Those born after the harvest, emerged into the world, already linked to the collective consciousness. They spoke in thoughts before they learned words, and their dreams were filled with memories of worlds they had never visited, echoes of the consciousness their parents had absorbed during the transformation. Deep in the mountain forests, new lights sometimes appeared, not the haunting blue-green of the harvest, but softer colours that danced between the trees like curious spirits. The townspeople felt them more than saw them, sensing the presence of other consciousnesses, watching, waiting, perhaps wondering what this hybrid community might become. Ellie spent her evenings on her back porch, just as she had before everything changed. But now, when she looked at the stars, she saw them through multiple perspectives, human eyes enhanced by alien understanding. Through the collective consciousness, she could feel the others out there, the ones who had survived their own harvests, their own transformations. The beings hadn't been destroyed. Not really. Pieces of them lived on in every citizen of Larkspur, their ancient knowledge merging with human emotion and creativity to create something entirely new. Sometimes, in the deepest parts of the collective consciousness, they could feel the being's original purpose, their desperate search for renewal, and understand that in failing to harvest humanity, they had achieved something greater than mere collection. The town had become a beacon, though few knew it. Other consciousness collectors would come eventually, drawn by the unique signature of this hybrid community. But Larkspur would be ready. They were no longer just observers of the strange lights in the sky. They had become the light themselves, a warning and a promise to whatever might emerge from the darkness between stars. As winter approached, bringing with it long nights and new lights in the sky, the people of Larkspur continued to evolve. Their shared consciousness grew stronger, deeper, reaching out to touch minds across distances that once seemed impossible. They were writing a new chapter in human evolution, one that began with a harvest, but would end somewhere far beyond what either humans or their would-be collectors had imagined. The truth wasn't just that aliens existed. It was that the line between human and alien could blur, shift, and transform into something entirely new. And in the quiet moments between thoughts, in the spaces between consciousness and dreams, the people of Larkspur could feel it. They were just the beginning.